Good morning, guys. Welcome to today's training on happiness beyond codependency. Where over the last 2-3 weeks, we've been focused really on the cycle, the narcissistic abuse cycle, specifically seduction, abuse, discard, and then the EDD cycle, which really drives the love addiction and fantasy component that codependency has, which is the euphoria, distress, despair cycle. Today, we're going to talk a bit about a very specific kind of what I call somatic fantasy that shows up and gets us stuck in toxic relationships. But before I do that, if you're new to me, I'm Burtcher, and I help codependents rediscover their happiness after narcissistic abuse, after love addiction, even after recovery from unavailable relationships, emotionally unavailable relationships. So, because codependency even shows up in those, and we'll be discussing that more in a couple weeks, actually, with a different kind of cycle that happens for people who have a habit of choosing emotionally unavailable partners. So we'll get into that in a bit. But before I do this, I need to share this out to the community. The community is your safe haven where you can find sanity again, tools and validation and care. To realize that you're not alone in this journey and that there's hundreds of thousands of us out there that have been through this. You're not crazy, and that you can actually heal and recover too. The link to the community is above on Facebook, below on YouTube, and if you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. And thank you guys for your support, for your feedback, and for being the badasses that you be. Because that's what I call my team, Team Badass, because we're strong. This takes courage. We're doing things that a lot of people won't do, honestly. We're doing things that can scare the living shit out of people. And so, to be crass but blunt there. So let me get this shared out to the community real quick, and then we'll hop into today's topic. It's because today we're going to be talking about that somatic memory, specifically the experience of, let's see, yay, it's shared. And let me know if you're here. Just comment below. Let's say hi to you. But we're talking about this concept of the other person feeling very, very familiar to us. I call this a somatic fantasy, specifically because it's felt. We experience it in the body. It doesn't really have a lot of language to it or an analytical component to it. It is felt. It's experienced, and it's a really kind of euphoric thing. It's a very compelling impulse. And the reason why is because that sensation is what I call attachment activation. Okay, so as human beings, we develop these things called attachments to other individuals and to even people, places, and other people, places, and things. Generally, we can develop attachment to anything we have feelings about or for. Okay, so it's an emotional experience, an emotional bond with that person, place, or thing. And when it comes to bonding with other human beings, especially parents, especially spouses or significant others or best friends, we have an intimate bond with them. And that's not meant to be a sexual intimate. That's an emotionally intimate, vulnerable, open, dependent state on them. We lean on them for things like meeting certain kinds of needs, and for shelter, for play, for companionship, protection, because instinctively we know that the world is a scary place. And the world can be a threatening experience for us, and so the body provides protection by creating bonds with other human beings, because we're social animals that way. And so when we experience this sensation of familiarity, like I know this person, I feel like I've known you all my life, that kind of thing, this is a somatic activation of that attachment, because we're subconsciously and picking up on signals and energy from them that actually feel really familiar. They are the things we've experienced with parents or with past relationships. And for those of us that have dealt with narcissistic parents, negligent parents, abusive parents, even emotionally unavailable parents, this is a massive red flag for us. Now, if we'd grown up in a strong, healthy family unit, and we had a very strong sense of ourself, and we were very comfortable sensing into our own autonomy, our own person, our own being while in relationship to other people, this activation would actually be a green flag, because we would be sensing into somebody that is healthy. But for us, our survivors of this kind of abuse and neglect, not so much. And that's why it's a red flag, because our body is telling us this person feels really familiar. And that means this person's likely going to put us through the same cycle we experienced with the previous individuals. So we need to heed this very, very seriously. It's a very important thing to take serious, because it's our body giving us a warning. I mean, I know it feels good. I know it can feel that. But if you actually lean into it a little bit and give yourself some space out of the euphoria that it triggers, you'll also find some fear, maybe a little dread. You'll find tension in your body. You'll find a resistance to it. You'll find that it's heavy. These are all the signals that this isn't healthy for you. These are the signals that this is not the direction to go in for you. Paradoxically, for codependence in our recovery, our happiness, our well-being, we need to lean towards meeting and developing bonds with people who are uncomfortable to us to a degree because they're healthy. And so we can feel triggered, we can feel activated with them because they're doing things that we would really want, but yet kind of they bring to life past trauma, past hurt. Not that we want to do this to activate trauma and hurt, that wouldn't be the objective, but it's the idea that we have to do the opposite of what we think we ought to do, because codependency in a lot of ways is like an inverted relationship paradigm. So it's kind of like you have a sock and you pulled it inside out. Well, if we pulled the sock right side out, we'd have a sock that functions and looks right. That'd be a normal, healthy experience in relationships. Codependency is like a sock being pulled inside out. It looks and acts like a sock, but something's off. And it's not really as functional or as comfortable or fitting as it could be. And this is kind of, it sounds like a strange concept to it, but that's the way I look at codependency. Is the world from the codependent view, the real world is actually backwards, which means we need to lean into building bonds with people whom we're not necessarily comfortable with, yet present themselves in very consistent, healthy ways. Okay? So, like, for instance, love for a codependent is typically synonymous with euphoria or intensity. But real love is not often very intense or euphoric. It's quite calm, warm, even safe, expansive, gentle, nurturing, kind, stable. It's very much the opposite, right? And that's what we need to lean into, is building connections with love that way. We need to advocate rather than please. Very polarized opposites right there. Very, very clear opposites. We need to ask ourselves first what we think and what we feel before we start thinking and feeling about what, considering them. Whereas in codependency, we only ask one question: what do they feel? What do they want? Right? So codependency is in a lot of ways the inversion of a healthy relationship. So we do the opposite, and that puts us into a healthy paradigm. Well, the same thing happens with the somatic activation of, man, you feel really familiar to me. It's like I've known you all my life. Yeah, it's because you've known somebody like them all your life, and that's your body warning you that this is not a person you want to build a relationship with. Or at a minimum, you need to be extremely cautious here. And for me, and this has really worked well out for me, and it works well for clients who do this, if I'm getting to know someone, I tend to come from a very black and white point of view. Are you healthy or are you not? And I only determine that by the pattern of behaviors they demonstrate as I get to know them. That's it. I don't care about nuance. I'm not interested in the gray area when I come to meeting people, because it's in the gray area that my life has been well, that in the gray area, that's where the abuse occurs. That's where the codependency gets triggered. That's where my life was really harmed for a long time, is because of, well, maybe they have trauma, or well this or well that. The gray area is not useful when getting to know people. If you're a person who has dealt with codependency, you need to have a very black and white point of view in getting to know them, so you can filter them effectively for you. That means you're paying attention to the pattern of behaviors. They show up specifically in how they respond to conflict, how they respond to your asks, how they respond to your limits, how they respond to your intimacy, your requests for intimacy and connection. If they don't do that, then you have nothing to go on, nothing, or you have nothing to build a relationship on, because you cannot trust them. They don't respond to those things with empathy, with understanding, with care, with a willingness to address those things. Then you can't build trust. And if you can't build trust, you can't have a safe relationship. Okay? And that's our job, is to start decoding this. And in the From Addiction to Connection, that's what we're focusing on, is building connection rather than addiction with someone. And that's one of the fundamental factors, is being able to discern a person that is healthy. And part of that is popping our fantasy. We've got to be able to identify when we're in fantasy, pop that bubble, and bring ourselves back to reality. Boom. This is one of those fantasies. The somatic fantasy of, oh, I know you, so this must be fate. We must be twin flames or soulmates or yada yada. No, you're meeting somebody whom is very familiar to you, because they are a lot like your previous bonded events, like your parents or a previous spouse or something. And if those were toxic relationships, the probability of this person being toxic is extremely high. And so that's why I take the black and white view with this. Like, if I feel like someone's really familiar to me, I hit the brakes and I start watching those patterns of behavior. I get honest with myself. I get back into what I call sane making. What am I choosing? What am I doing? What are they choosing? What are they doing? How do I feel about it? That's what has to happen, because I know my brain loves to go into la la land, and it will. Fantasy is just part of the coping mechanism that my brain became an expert at. I'm not going to change that by fighting it. I'm going to change it by acknowledging it and coming back to reality and going, well, yeah, this is fantasy. And then discerning the person for who they are. And once, if abuse shows up once, I'm out. I have a zero tolerance policy with that, because getting to know people deserve. If abuse shows up in any relationship, I'm pretty much done, whether it's long term or short term. But if I'm getting to know somebody and they start abusing me or they start gaslighting me, I'm done. I don't have the time or the energy to invest in trying to find out if they'll change, because my job is my happiness, not their well-being, not their healing. So we got to get pretty choosy, pretty rigid on whom we allow to be in our life and whom we're going to invest our time and energy in. And one of the ways we can do that is by acknowledging this fantasy of actually knowing someone as well as we think we do, and seeing that for what it really is. And that's a red flag, a very, very big stop sign saying you need to stop and check things out and likely not proceed forward. So you could put it into a yellow category, because with my approach with red, yellow, and green flags, red means it's over, it's done. Yellow means caution. Green means go. So you could put this in a yellow category if you want to add nuance to it. But please be mindful of your own well-being rather than giving people exceptions for bad behavior. Because, man, as codependents, we're gifted with the gift of undue tolerance. We tolerate so much shit. Don't we? I mean, how much of it have you put up with? And what does that cost you? We need to get more choosy and more intolerant to bad behavior. And that'll allow us to filter out people pretty quick and then build safe, reliable relationships with the healthy people that remain. And there is an abundance of them out there, I promise. But you don't have to even believe that promise or believe me. You'll discover that for yourself as you open up in your own healing and becoming aligned with your own value, your own voice, your own vision, and really building that interconnected sense with yourself and with others. You start to see it blossom. But yeah, guys, I wanted to touch on that because a post a few days ago brought up that question, and many of you asked me to kind of jump in there and share more on this concept. And that's really what it is. we have this activation of this attachment. And that's what feels really familiar to us. It doesn't mean that this is fate. It doesn't mean you're compatible with them. It doesn't mean that they're healthy for you. It doesn't necessarily mean they're unhealthy for you, but it does mean that you need to be very, very cautious about what you do going forward with that. In addition, anytime you find yourself going into euphoria with any relationship, you want to pop that bubble, because fantasy isn't reality, and it's just going to lead you into more pain. The more honest you get and the more willing you are to confront what's really happening, the healthier your relationships will be, both with yourself and with life. And you'll see a massive reduction in both the chaos and drama and fundamentally the abuse and distress that you experience in relationships with that approach. So it's an attachment activation. It's also a really good place to explore unmet needs. So when I find this familiarity showing up in me, I lean into asking myself this question: what need is trying to get met through this? And then I listen to what shows up in my body and in my awareness, and then I meet that need. Because it's going to be one of the 10 core needs. It's going to be like acceptance or time, attention, playfulness. Man, today my brain is rusty. Presence, companionship, support, things like that. It's going to be one of those needs. And then when I know what the need is, I can meet it. See? And then the fantasy contracts. It gets smaller because reality becomes safer to accept and to acknowledge. And life just gets easier, because that's really what it's about. We deserve to have healthy relationships. And healthy relationships aren't filled with drama. They're not filled with chaos. They're filled with a bit of boredom, high predictability and consistency, but really a nurturing joy in being with that person and experiencing life together, knowing that you have someone who has your back, you have their back, and that you can play, right? And it's not so much about support anymore. It's not even about survival. It's about playfulness and enjoying them, enjoying yourself. So that's my bit on that. Thank you guys for showing up. I appreciate you. Remember, we got 12 days before From Addiction to Connection launches. We launch June 28th, 7 p.m. That's Sunday. This is where I help you accomplish 3 specific things. I help you restore your peace, your sanity, and your connection, which helps you eliminate your dependency on your love addiction or trauma bond to the other individual. It also helps you heal what's called internalized loneliness. So even if you don't relate to the trauma bond or craving for the narcissist or the abuser, but you have this deep sense of fear of loneliness or aloneness, this, of course, was made for you. It's one of the biggest components we address in that. We address that through attachment distress regulation, the ADR process. And if you find yourself really paralyzed at the idea of leaving a relationship or being left or having a relationship end, and that brings a huge amount of chaos and pain into your life, this course will help you break free of that as well and teach you how to calm that attachment distress and restore connection in a way that you don't actually have to go through it all that much. And in fact, you may not go through it ever again. That's been one of my experiences in breakups and in losing relationships, because of the network of connections I've built and the trust I've built in those with those individuals and with myself. The attachment distress is short-lived and sometimes doesn't even show up. So there's a lot of freedom and peace there, being able to leave relationships that don't work without having to go through the emotional hell of disconnection from them. You're able to grieve, move forward, have your sadness, but you're not in a huge frame of mind of distress and disorientation. So that's what we accomplished there, and this is the only time I teach it. This is the 2020 class, so I teach it once a year, so you want to jump in on that. Appreciate you guys. If you have questions about, feel free to PM me. Feel free to reach out. We can hop on the phone or we can talk and chat, get your questions answered. I appreciate you. Remember that you're worth knowing, loving, and keeping, guys, and I will see you for tomorrow's training. Okay? Bye-bye.